time once again for Community Forum, and we're very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning, Jonathan Grant. Jonathan Grant is the Executive Director of the Tenants Union of Washington. Jonathan, thank you very much for coming back in and spending time with us this morning.
Thank you.
So tell us about the Tenants Union of Washington.
Well, the Tenants Union of Washington was founded in 1977. We're a membership-based organization, and we're statewide. We have offices in Spokane and Seattle. The Tenants Union is pretty much responsible for more or less, most of the tenant protections that you have as a renter being on the books. In Seattle, in particular, we fought for just cause eviction protections, tenant relocation assistance, protecting people from unreasonable lease terms. And the kind of the heart of the Tenants Union is the community organizing work that we do. I think right now in Seattle, what we're seeing is just an explosion of renters in crisis. There's more and more folks coming to our door, and rising rents are displacing more folks out of the city. So right now there's a huge need for the work that we do, and more so now than ever. And I think that what's important about the Tenants Union is that because we're membership-based and because it's our members that really kind of steer the organization, we can't compromise those values. And I think that's what's really great about us and unique is that, when it comes down to it, if it's, a problem with, a landlord, a problem with a developer, when it's a problem with City Hall, the Tenants Union is going to be kind of unwavering in making sure that the interests that we're upholding are the interests of our members. So if folks are interested in joining the Tenants Union and joining the movement to fight for renters' rights, they should visit our website at tenantsunion.org. And there's actually a little, right on the front page there's a link to become a member. And it's just $1 for every $1,000 that you make. It's a sliding scale because we want to be as inclusive to folks as possible. Predominantly, our membership are low-income tenants and working-class people. And so I encourage folks to go and sign up. We also have a little action alert that folks can type in their email address and get action alerts for coming out to our direct actions if we're doing a campaign, against a particular developer or a particular landlord, or if there's tenant legislation that's out there that, we need folks to turn out for. We're really kind of the go-to place for that. So we encourage folks to sign up, become a member, and join the Tenants Union.
And it appears from my scanning the news over the last several months that you guys have had numerous direct actions.
That's right. I mean, in the last year, we've held, a half dozen or so campaigns in different buildings where it's, affordable housing complexes. And this could be either housing that's subsidized or not subsidized, but is just, below market. So affordable to like working class folks. And, what we've experienced is that, if you're living in an apartment complex and you get a notice from your landlord that says, we're going to be increasing your rent by 100%, in some cases 200%, tenants always get more out of that situation when they come together and organize. So what the Tenants Union does is that we go into these buildings, we send organizers to do workshops. Because what we find is that if they can, developers will try to skirt the law. And these are laws that tenants have fought hard for to get on the books. But like any law, it always comes down to enforcement. And it's often the case that it's up to tenants to enforce the laws that they help to get on the books in the first place. So tenants are entitled to just cause eviction protections, tenant relocation assistance, and all sorts of things like this. But if they don't know what their rights are, often it's the case that folks kind of throw up their hands and say, well, I don't know. Maybe I don't have any rights. So education is really a key piece to the work that we do. But then once you know your rights, you have to know how to enforce them. And when people come together in their building and form a tenant association or a tenant council, it gives them collective bargaining power, essentially, with the landlord. And what we encourage folks to do is to organize. It's often the case that folks who are, facing that kind of adversity can ask, quite a bit more than even what the law demands. So we've seen situations where the developer is trying to displace folks, and the tenants came together and have either stopped the rent increases from happening or at the very least get more time to move or get relocation assistance. So we always encourage folks to organize because you always get more out of it if you don't. To give you some examples of that, one of our major campaigns has been at the Lockhaven Apartments in Ballard and then also the Theodore Apartments in Ravenna. Both of these buildings were affordable. The Theodora was actually a HUD-subsidized building that served very low-income veterans. So we're talking about folks who are on a fixed income, and it was actually owned by a nonprofit, the Volunteers of America. Now, we always encourage nonprofits to build more affordable housing and to also preserve it as affordable housing, but we were really disappointed to see when that nonprofit then sold it to a private developer. What that private developer wanted to do was to flip these units. They wanted to gut the building, and so they had to get a permit from the city to do that, and then, displace all the tenants and turn this, low-income housing, which is like the only housing for veterans in that entire neighborhood. There's no really else that's affordable for folks to live on a fixed income like that. And, they're going to turn it into luxury housing. So the tenants actually organized and came together and formed a tenant council called the Theodore Rescue Committee. And what they found was that it was actually the same developer that was kicking out tenants, just across town in Ballard at the Lockhaven Apartments. And so the tenants from both of those buildings started organizing together to put kind of Goodman on notice that you can't just skirt the laws, you can't just evict people without some consequence to it. And, for the first time, I think in 10 years, and to my knowledge, tenants took to the streets and marched through Ballard and marched through, Ravenna and actually picketed John Goodman's private residence. And I think what's really interesting is that when you look at, the folks who are being displaced, I mean, these are the folks that have been our community members and been in our community their entire lives. I mean, the folks that have lived in the Theodora and at the Lockhaven, some of the folks that lived there in that particular building for over 20 years. And to have their rents jacked up in this way, to have no stability in, their homes, there's really nowhere else for them to go in this town. So, at the Lockhaven Apartments, what just kind of blew our minds was that John Goodman was a neighbor. Like, his home was just less than 2 miles away from that apartment complex. And that's, over 100 units of housing that's affordable to working class people. And so the tenants organized a march and a rally in front of his home. And I think it should be clear, like, we're not talking about, a nice, small, single-family home. He actually has a commercially zoned marina that is his home, and that's where he lives. And he's got, his boats out there, and it's just less than 2 miles away from their apartment. So we have, this just shocking, disparity of this person living on his private, marina, this little villa on the water in Ballard, displacing folks just down the street, hundreds of working class families. And, when the tenants, organized, the first thing, and this is what we're seeing happening across town, is that the tenants got bogus eviction notices, and they said, you have to move out in 20 days. And one of the protections that the Tenants Union fought for to get on the books are these what are called just cause protections, that a landlord can't just terminate your tenancy for no reason. They actually have to have a just cause, a reason that's legal for them to do so. And many of the tenants at the Lockhaven got these bogus notices. And the Lockhaven tenants really deserve a lot of credit because they started organizing themselves and then reached out to the Tenants Union for assistance. And the tenants were able to actually get those bogus eviction notices rescinded. And the way that they did that was by filing a complaint with the Department of Planning and Development, which is the city agency, the city department that enforces these local codes. But the department can only enforce what they know about. And so it was important that the tenants file those complaints. And we always encourage folks so that if you're facing a economic eviction, or if there's development happening in your building, odds are the landlord or the developer is probably not following the law. And so it's always good to call the city and find out what kind of laws need to be enforced. or go to the Tenants Union. And actually, I should also mention, if folks ever have questions about their rights, they can call our hotline at 206-723-0500, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And it's a hotline that serves the whole state, so sometimes it can get hard to get through. But we also have walk-in clinics, and pretty much everyone gets served at our clinics, which are throughout Seattle. And the locations can also be found on our website at tenantsunion.org. So what happened at the Lock Haven was that tenants demanded that the developer set aside some of the units to be affordable for some of the long-term residents that had lived there that were very low income. The tenants were actually able to get the owner and into the room and actually sit down at the table to negotiate. And what the tenants got was more than what they would have gotten had they not organized. They got increased relocation assistance. They got more time. And again, none of this would have happened had they not organized. Now, at the Theodore Apartments, I think the real travesty there was that building was ultimately lost, and that John Goodman will probably be able to turn that into luxury housing. And there is a truly depleting, just a very small number of housing that's affordable for veterans who are disabled. And the loss of that housing, it's over 100 units of affordable housing. And I think what people need to remember is that it is so much more affordable for the city to preserve those buildings and to invest the money to upkeep those buildings as affordable housing than it is to build completely new construction and build, a brand new affordable housing complex. And so that's why the Tenants Union fights so hard to try to preserve these buildings, because we think that it's really the city's obligation to preserve these buildings. And the tenants at the Theodore Rescue Committee actually went to, the Department of Planning and Development. They went to the Office of Housing and said, you guys need to intervene here. There's an opportunity to preserve. It's over 100 units of housing for very, very low income people, people earning, well below probably 15% of the poverty line, 15% of the area median income. And the city basically said, no, we're not going to do that. It's not our role, was what we constantly heard from the city. And the tenants were really frustrated. We thought this was an amazing opportunity to preserve this very low-income housing in Ravenna that once it's gone forever, and there's really no place for low-income folks in that community anymore. Now, what happened after the city refused to intervene at the Theodora was that tenants at the Lock Haven, tenants at the Theodora were looking at their options and saying, well, gosh, what is it? Why would the city not intervene? Why isn't the city doing more to aggressively preserve affordable housing and to kind of back up tenants? And, at the Tenants Union, what we know is that the city does a lot of business with developers. And so tenants started making inquiries about, what kind of business is the city doing with John Goodman and these developers? And they found out that actually there is a large parcel of land that's right in front of City Hall. That's public land. It's owned by all of us. And the city sold it to a developer called Triad. And then the tenants found out that actually, with a little research, that Triad is actually co-owned by who else but Goodman Real Estate. So the tenants thought that this was outrageous, and they came together and formed a citywide coalition called the Displaced Tenants for Accountability and Transparency. And what they found was that not only is it outrageous that public land was sold to, one of Seattle's serial evictors of low-income families, but the city was actually compelled to break the law for this developer to make that development happen. Because it turned out that the permit for that plot of land called Civic Square, which is right in front of City Hall, had expired. It had expired 2 years ago, and the developer just let it expire. The tenants came together and FOIA'd the information about the permit, and we found that there was correspondence between the developer and the city that said, if you don't renew our permit, we're going to sue you. And the city felt compelled to renew the permit. Now, when a permit expires, it kind of opens the door to what can happen to that land. There would be a whole other public process. There could be a whole new conversation about what to do about Civic Square. And the city closed the door on that by illegally extending the permit, which they were not by law allowed to do. So the tenants came together and formed a broad coalition of other folks who have been displaced across the city, and they filed suit against the city of Seattle and Triad, which is owned by John Goodman. So right now that is currently being litigated in court. But I think what the tenants are hoping to see is that, one, the city shouldn't be doing business with the bad actors in our community, the folks who are evicting low-income families. Two, if you're going to sell public land, you need to get something out of it. The only thing that the city was going to get out of it was the Civic Square would have been a public park for people to, put down their shopping bags. And then a residential structure that would have had $500,000 to $1 million condos on it. And, that's outrageous. We're living in a time when, rents are just skyrocketing. And one of the things that drives rents in that way is property values going up. Well, we can't right now control what happens to private property, but we sure as heck can control what's going on public land. And so if we're going to prioritize affordable housing, and if we're going to be responsive to the crisis that is happening in the city, we need to use our public assets wisely. And we think that the Civic Square development needs to be on the table again, and it needs to have a public process to decide, 20 years ago, back in 1996 was when they made the plan for Civic Square. Times have changed for the worse, right? There's now over 3,000 people who are homeless on the streets in Seattle. That's over a 30% increase just in this decade alone. Last year, rent increases were the highest in the nation. And if we don't use our public land and our public resources to try to address this crisis, we're really doing a disservice to the community. And I think that is really what tenants are trying to accomplish with this lawsuit. That, it's not enough that it's bad enough that developers are getting these kind of sweetheart deals with the city, but if there's this opportunity to kind of have this, to readdress what that property and what that land was supposed to be used for, why wouldn't the city take advantage of that? Unfortunately, the city did not. They illegally extended the permit, and now we'll see what happens in court. But we think that, the conversation should be reopened on how that land is used. I mean, that could be affordable housing that the city builds right there, right? And the symbolic value of having this gleaming glass in, steel tower looming over City Hall after this, what I would call theft of public land, I think that is outrageous, and it would be an accurate symbol of the way that City Hall is making its priorities right now, but it shouldn't be. And I think that it's up to tenants and it's up to the community to let City Hall know that we need to ask more. We need to demand more, not just from developers, but from ourselves. And the thing about it is that more and more people are coming to the Tenants Union. More folks are being displaced from their buildings. We're seeing 100% rent increases, 150%, 200%. It's amazing to me, how much. I think also, I don't know if this is a Northwest thing or what, but there's just this attitude of, well, that's just how it goes. That's just the way markets work. Well, that's not good enough. That is just not good enough. In other contexts, we have regulations to prevent price gouging. A bank can't just make any kind of loan product they want if you're buying a home. Last year, the city council tried to pass a limit on tow trucking fees because they were gouging their customers. We have usury laws against this kind of abuse. But for some reason, when it comes to rental property, we can't stop egregious price gouging. And that's outrageous, and we should demand more. Right now there's a state ban on regulating rents, and that was actually created in the 1980s in response to the city of Seattle trying to pass a rent regulation ordinance. And it's important for folks to know, it's much like when they passed the minimum wage law. When Seattle passed the $15 minimum wage, the first thing that, the business interests did is that they went down to Olympia and they tried to ban it. Well, unfortunately, in 1980, it was, the Reagan years, and they were able to get a ban on Seattle having local authority. But since that has happened, the city of Seattle has never passed a resolution demanding that the state give them the authority for rent regulations. And I think that it's important that the city, on a public, official record, say, we need this local authority for rent stabilization. We want rent stabilization. And I think that is the first step. We need to have a conversation locally and create the public pressure locally in order to make that next step to get changes at the state level.
Can you talk about how these outrageous rent increases are really tools to get around existing laws?
So one of the big problems with the ban on rent control or stabilizing rents is that it's absolute. And so what we're seeing is that when a developer comes in and buys a building, typically they want to flip it and they want to, do these cosmetic improvements and make some structural changes. And when you do that, you have to get a permit from the city to get authorization to make those changes to the building, to make sure that they're up to code. Now, if you get that permit and you raise the rent and it causes folks to be displaced, or if the change of the use of that building causes folks to be displaced, if you're low income, you're entitled to up to $3,000 worth of relocation assistance. Now, I can't tell you how many thousands of people have been displaced by this practice because the city doesn't track this information. But what they do track is how many people have actually succeeded in getting that relocation assistance, and it's in the hundreds. It's a tiny fraction. It's like 100. It's like a tiny amount of people who actually get that assistance. And part of the reason is that because the ban is so absolute, the city can't stop a landlord from economically evicting people first and then applying for the permit. And so what we're seeing are landlords left and right circumventing the law and getting out of paying tens of thousands or sometimes much more than that in relocation assistance that they are legally obligated to pay low-income residents who are being displaced by this market speculation. And what we are proposing to the city council is to impose penalties on developers that try to circumvent the law. Right now, there's really nothing that authorizes the city to say, you know what, you can't just raise rents and then not pay the relocation assistance to folks. So we would like to see those folks penalized. I mean, it seems really clear that you're circumventing the law, that you jack up the rents 200%, apply for a permit 2 months later, after everyone's moved out because they can't afford to live there, and then get out of having to pay, the tens of thousands of relocation assistance to those low-income families. We think that those folks should be penalized. The city has the authority to do it, and right now, Councilmember Mike O'Brien is actually looking to introduce legislation to do just that. And that's in response to the tenant movement. And I really want to commend the council member for taking heed from tenants and actually trying to do something about this.
Got about 5 minutes left. So you also had a recent victory with, is it SHA that was trying to jack the rents?
Yeah. So, at a time when rents are rising, the Seattle Housing Authority had this terrible idea to raise the rent by over 400% on all the working families in their housing, which would have affected over 7,000 people. This was egregious. This was a terrible idea. They tried to steamroll tenants, and the tenant movement responded, and tenants took over SHA, chair meetings. They marched in the streets in Queen Anne, which is where the Housing Authority's headquarters is, and delivered a joint message saying, no, this is totally unacceptable. Tenants, put pressure on City Council to totally oppose it, and right now the council is considering replacing members of the SHA Board of Commissioners with candidates who are who are approved and vetted by the tenant movement. We just found out a few weeks ago that the Seattle Housing Authority has taken the proposal back and said, you know what, we're gonna reconsider this maybe in a year, but right now we're not going to do it. So tenants have declared a victory for now, but we have to seal the deal, and the council has to actually appoint pro-tenant SHA board commissioners to make sure that this proposal remains buried, because it was a terrible idea. We shouldn't ask low-income tenants to try to backfill the affordable housing crisis. I think that we can ask more from developers, more from landlords, and more from the city to provide affordable housing.
All right. Can you give us a quick summary of legislation that's being proposed at the state legislature?
Well, right now, this coming Wednesday, Senate Bill 5123 is the Fair Tenant Screening Act. It's a bill that would create portable screening reports. So when you apply for housing and you have to pay that $35 to $50 screening report, you only have to pay once, and then you can use it again in multiple locations. It would also eliminate the practice of landlords using eviction records against the tenant when the tenant won in court. That's a really important bill, and if folks want to have their voice heard on that, to encourage it to pass, they should go to our website at tenantsunion.org, sign up for our action alerts, and there'll be more information available. There's also an important law that would give tenants a 90-day notice for a rent increase. We think that it is it doesn't address the root cause of displacement, but at least would provide some temporary relief. And actually, the Seattle Times editorial board wrote recently that they actually think it's a reasonable approach as well. And so we encourage the Senate to move that forward. Another bill is to prevent discrimination against Section 8 voucher holders, so that, just because you have a public subsidy, landlords can't just say no to you because you're poor. So there's some really important tenant legislation coming up this year, and it's going to be a tough fight because the Senate's currently controlled by Republicans.
All right, so it sounds like there's battles both at the city level and the state level.
That's right.
It sounds like the city has always at least been a little more, for lack of a better word, progressive.
That's true. The city of Seattle, if we're going to actually secure victories for tenants, it's more likely to come from a local level. So we encourage folks to join the Tenants Union and join the fight.
All right. We are talking with Jonathan Grant. He is Executive Director of the Tenants Union of Washington, which formerly was Seattle Tenants Union. Is that right?
Yeah, until we became statewide.
So again, tell us how people can connect to your organization and the different services you provide.
So we have a statewide hotline on tenants' rights at 206-723-0500. And then in Seattle, we have walk-in clinics that you can also find the locations of at our website, tenantsunion.org. We also have monthly membership meetings, and we encourage folks to join and become a member. Again, there's a link on our website to do that. And yeah, we encourage folks to make contact and join the Tenants Union.
And is your organization involved with, I know that Seattle Council member Shama Sawant is looking at putting in affordable housing over city-owned properties. Are you involved with that at all?
Well, Councilmember Sawant has been a really great ally to tenants and has come to a lot of events to support tenants' rights. So I think she deserves a lot of praise for that. We're working with Councilmember Sawant, Councilmember Licata, Councilmember O'Brien to try to push for more affordable housing in the city.
And you're also a member of the Housing Affordability and Livability Committee.
That's right.
Which has got your report coming out in May. Is
yes,
that right?
Yeah. So the mayor convened a group that is contemplating different ideas for affordable housing. It's a work in progress. We're kind of seeing how it goes so far. But I should also mention that we're a member of the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, and they're one of our most important partners at the state level fighting for tenant protections. And I want to give them a lot of credit for pushing a lot of the state legislation as well.
All right. Well, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us this morning.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.